We can finally be free of the terrible sense we have that who we are isn't enough, or that if they really knew us, they'd leave. Our relationship with ourselves determines the quality of our relationships with others. It seems so obvious, but in the moment it can slip away from us. When we are not feeling so good about ourselves, when we are hurting, when we feel lonely and insecure, of course we want someone else to tell us we're okay. But the better we know ourselves, the better we know our needs and what we have to give. It helps if at least one person in the relationship knows at least one of the people in the relationship, a member explained. But I've been a stranger to myself sometimes even when I wasn't new. Seeing into myself honestly and accurately is something that comes and goes. I find now I can name a lot of emotions, but that doesn't mean I know what I'm feeling at any given moment, especially when my feelings are strong. I still default to anger, depression, and resistance when what I'm really feeling is loneliness, desperation, or fear. It comes out sideways at the people nearest me. I comfort myself with the idea that I recognize it sooner than I used to, after a bad week, rather than a bad month or a breakup. But it still hasn't gone away. We can see the rewards of the 10th step when we start being able to recognize our emotions as we are having them. When we can identify our own responses, we can choose to respond rather than react. Practicing principles in our relationship doesn't mean being someone else, or being phony, but it can feel a little awkward at first. Our sponsor can be a great help to us as we begin to try new ways of responding or reacting. As we try to replace old, defective ways of thinking with new ideas and attitudes, issues arise that we may not have seen before. We are faced with choices and challenges we didn't see coming. Being in a relationship is a different experience when we put unity first. When we set aside our own needs and consider the good of the partnership or the family as a whole, it does not mean that we tolerate our needs going unmet or unacknowledged. We start to recognize that each of us will get what we need if both of us come to the relationship with an attitude of willingness and a belief that when we allow our unity to be a priority, we can turn the results over to a power greater than ourselves. Self-support is a spiritual principle, and learning to support our own spirits is a critical part of our development. Of course, we don't just go it alone. We have the group, we have our sponsor and trusted friends, and we have a higher power that helps us carry on. We share our triumphs and burdens with our partner, but learn not to make them responsible for our moods or the overall quality of our lives. When we can have a bad day without insisting our partner also be miserable, we know something is really changing. The first time I came home angry, and my girlfriend started in, and I didn't say the next wrong thing, I knew a higher power was working in my life, said one member. Learning the difference between having a partner and taking a hostage, or being taken hostage, is a big step for a lot of us. Letting go of expectations can be a nice name for letting go of control. Allowing our partners and ourselves to experience personal autonomy means we can grow and change at our own pace, and the relationship can benefit from what each of us brings to it. When we are willing to stand still and be present in a relationship even as it changes, or as we change, we come to understand commitment in a way. Just as it's normal in recovery to sometimes think about using, sometimes in the closest relationships we may think about running. Standing still in spite of the impulse to run can be a great spiritual exercise. A sane solution is often possible if we are willing to wait for the answers we need. Open-mindedness is critical to getting through difficulties in our relationships. Being with someone who is not in recovery presents particular challenges. One is that we may feel judged or excluded by our friends in the rooms. Too often we think of people coming in two types, in recovery and needing recovery. The very idea of a healthy relationship with someone who isn't one of us can seem unlikely. In fact, it's no more or less likely than being happy with someone who is in recovery. We may have to work a little harder to balance our priorities between our commitments to our partner and to our recovery. When we're out of balance, it can seem like we're leading a double life. We may find that the language we use to express ourselves or describe our feelings is not the same. Relationships require compromise and learning. In the rooms we find the tools we need to have the relationships we want in our lives. Outside the fellowship, We find ways to apply the principles without necessarily naming what we're doing. The flexibility that relationships require comes more easily to us when we are practicing principles in our lives. We learn to resolve challenges as they arise and to have the courage to say what we think and how we feel, even when it's uncomfortable. Willingness to change means that we can allow relationships to grow, cool off, or develop into something we hadn't imagined before. When a relationship that's important to us isn't working, it can feel like nothing is working. Conflict with our loved ones can be traumatic, and a breakup with a lover or friend can set off an overwhelming wave of emotions. Relationship troubles are hard for anyone, but for addicts they hold particular danger. The pain can be so great that using seems like an option again. If our friends in recovery seem to be taking sides, we can feel so alienated that going to meetings feels unsafe. That whole triangle of fear, anger, and resentment can feel like an iron cage, and the antidote, connection to others, seems like the last thing we want. Taking care of ourselves in the simplest ways, like eating, sleeping, and going to work, can be very difficult when we are in pain. The newcomers around us can serve as powerful examples, reminding us to show up and reach out when we're hurting. Any member at any time is liable to save our lives. We might find, after some consideration, that a relationship really does need to end. But we can do it in a way that we are comfortable with, instead of acting on impulse and leaving a painful mess to clean up later. Ending a relationship doesn't mean someone has to be wrong or bad. In fact, it can be the best thing for all involved. We can feel pressure to stay in a relationship, for social approval, the kids, complacency, or fear, even though we know it's time to go. It is an act of courage to do what we think is right without having to create damage to justify our actions. We no longer need to have an affair to end a marriage. We may have the clarity not to enter that marriage to begin with, or to exit with dignity and integrity. We let go of our schoolyard mentality and allow ourselves to be present with each other as adults, willing and ready to share the experience.